Hello, everyone. Welcome into We Witnessed, a program here by Nexstar Media Group, where we take a look back at the archives of our more than 115 newsrooms over the last 5 or so decades and dig up that video of what was a local story but became a national headline. For today's episode, we're going to focus on an event that happened at San Francisco Airport. And I know there's a number of people out there that may have a fear of flying. This is not the episode for you. It is about a fatal plane crash, one of very few. I do want to add statistically the safest form of transit by passenger per mile air flying in the airs. But nonetheless, it is something that can bring up a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions for those who fly often or have that fear. So that is my warning at the start. But to really bring us into the story, I want to start with a bit of a synopsis video from our station KRON, or KRON 4 in San Francisco, to introduce you to the fatal crash of Asiana Flight 214.
It was just after 11 in the morning on July 6, 2013. 291 passengers and 16 crew members started their final descent into San Francisco International Airport after a 10-hour flight from Seoul, South Korea. But as Flight 214 approached the runway, the plane clipped a seawall, snapping off the tail section of the aircraft, sending the plane spinning out of control. Hundreds of passengers scrambled to escape the burning wreckage. Emergency crews rushing to the scene, trying to contain the fire and treat the injured. In the midst of the chaos, a rescue vehicle fatally strikes a teenage passenger covered in foam on the runway. The San Mateo County coroner later finds the girl died from the collision. Among those pulled from the debris, 15-year-old Liu Yipeng. She would be rushed to San Francisco General along with 10 other people in critical condition, but she would succumb to her injuries less than a week later. In all, roughly half the people on board the Asiana Flight, 187 of them, sustained injuries. 3 teenage girls, all Chinese students, died that tragic day. The Aviation Safety Network blaming the crash on the flight crew, saying the pilots mismanaged the descent. The National Transportation Safety Board found an overly complicated flight system on the Boeing 777, which investigators say the pilots did not know how to use properly. A representative from the Federal Aviation Administration tells KRON 4 the Asiana 214 crash forced the FAA to look at how aircraft rescue teams respond to emergencies, how they are trained, and what kind of equipment is used. San Francisco airport officials say they've made major investments in emergency preparedness. SFO now has a Boeing 767 aircraft that offers emergency training and an airport rescue firefighting simulator, among other new resources to help prevent another tragedy. Reporting in San Francisco, Stephanie Lin, KRON 4 News.
And even this look-back package, as great as it does summarizing that event, more information has come out since that time. There's a lot to unpack in this particular story, and I'm not going to do it alone. I'm going to bring in now Teresa Estacio, who's an investigative reporter with KRON 4. Teresa, thank you for taking the time to talk about Asiana 214 all these years later.
It was hard to watch, honestly. I was down there. I got the call to respond to that area, and it really, to watch that, to listen to that one more time puts you right there again as a witness, as a member of the media, as, as a parent. It was just a horrifying situation to be there at that time.
Well, and I'm appreciative that you're willing to sort of lift that curtain. So often in the moment when these stories are being told, you don't really get to see what went into finding the information, to covering it, to hear about personal reactions, because we're all human, as best as we do as journalists, to be unbiased and just the facts. Like you said, as parents, hearing that the 3 fatalities were teenage girls, I mean, it still hits you a certain way. Before we get to your kind of revisiting the impact it's had on you, though, I would love for you to step back to 2013. Where were you when you first heard something had happened at San Francisco, or International, excuse me?
Yeah, we were in the newsroom, just a normal kind of editorial meeting, working on other stories. And then all of a sudden, we were getting alerts. Something was happening at SFO, and we were trying to figure out what was going on. I was calling my sources, trying to get kind of a sense of just the totality of the situation. How bad was it? A lot of conflicting information. As those, major situations unfold, there's always conflicting information. And, my boss just saying, go, 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 right? Just go, right? We'll figure it all out. So there was just a mass exodus out of the newsroom and heading to SFO. We were all talking with one another. I work for an amazing team of journalists at KRON, and we are friends as well as colleagues. So we were all trying to figure out amongst us, you go there, and then our boss is also saying, look, I need you to go to the international terminal at SFO. I need you to go over here to the hospital. We're hearing people being brought to San Francisco General Hospital. So we just descended, as we do, over to SFO. There's a lot of rules and regulations. You can't just naturally just show up at an airport.
Yeah.
Right. So we were trying to, figure out is there a staging area? Where is this on the tarmac? How do we get video? How do we don't have a helicopter. And that was before drones, right? So how are we going to get this information and this video? And there's different aspects of the airport where we can be down south from the airport, and that would give us a vantage point. And this is long before we all had these great phones that could take video. So, these days, of course, I get to a scene and I'm asking everyone to send me through WhatsApp or whatever video. Hey, do you have your video? This is me. Give me your video.
Yeah.
This was, way back then.
Well, and a little context too on SFO for those that haven't flown into it. It is right on the bay. And in fact, that particular runway where it hit, we might have heard in the story there, the seawall. So you're actually flying in over the water. So then for you trying to cover it, your only access to it is through the airport. You can't just go around to another fence. And so what you're describing on even trying to get to the scene and find out what was going on, I can imagine a bit of chaos there. What was it like when you guys finally started getting information that, yes, a plane had clipped the seawall, the tail had come off, responders were on their way to the plane?
Our heads were all spinning. Of course, as journalists, we want the video. We need the video. And so Dan Kerman was able to get down lower, one of my colleagues, a longtime journalist at KRON 4. So he was able to get down to the tarmac. I'm typically sent to talk to people. So I was trying to get, the victim angle is usually a strength of mine. They want me to go and compassionately talk to people. So I was trying to find anyone coming in, and then airport officials, of course, trying to control the situation, which is always that conflict. I understand that they're trying to protect people. And of course, it's, this juxtaposition of being a journalist and trying to be compassionate. And there's all of this mix of emotion that's going on. And I'm like, I understand, but I also need to do my job.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm storming in, with the camera, trying to get anyone who saw anything. And there were some witnesses. And so I think that's where it started was, what did you see? And to record it and to start unpacking the situation, as horrific as it was.
Yeah. And then, of course, later details would come out. I have another story I want to sort of flash back to from that time, which really, and it does a great job using what computer-generated graphics we had in 2013, but laying out the lead up to and what actually happened to Asiana 214. So let's pause and watch that.
291 passengers and 16 crew members are on board when the aircraft leaves Incheon Airport near Seoul. The time is 4:30 p.m. on Saturday afternoon. After crossing the international date line, Flight 214 is due to land at San Francisco at 11:30 Saturday morning. No problems are reported during the 10-hour flight. The tower at SFO gives the pilots clearance to land.
And 214 Avenue, San Francisco, Tower, and we clear left, sir, land.
The airliner descends to 1,000 feet. Its airspeed is about 170 miles an hour. At 500 feet, it's down to 155 miles an hour, below the aircraft's safe landing speed. 16 seconds before impact, it's down to 135 miles an hour. By the time the plane descends to 125 feet, its speed is down to 129 miles an hour. In the final 8 seconds, the pilot tries to speed up. The tail of the Boeing 777 strikes the seawall at the end of the runway at 122 miles an hour. The impact slams the plane onto the runway. The landing gear and one engine shear off as the fuselage rears up on its right side, then veers off into the grass. Leaking fuel drips into the cabin as passengers use inflatable slides to escape. The tower responds.
14 heavy emergency vehicles are responding. We have everyone on their way.
And so there's a lot more details. I have a few more that I want to add for some additional context. You know, we learned so much after the fact. And so through that investigation, we found out information on the pilot specifically. The very first story we watched mentioned that there was some fault on the crew, that primarily it was, let me find right here, primary cause was crew's mismanagement of the plane's final approach and additional factors, deficiencies in Boeing's documentation for a complex system, and Asiana's airline pilot training, which is most interesting when we learn that the crew had 3 captains and 1 first officer, and at the time of the crash, it was the pilot in command who is responsible for the safe operation was in the first officer position, filling a role of check and instructor captain, and it was actually the pilot flying. It was his initial operating experience training, and he was only halfway through that program, only with 43 hours in a 777, the type of plane, over 9 different flights. Additionally, the pilot that was acting as the instructor, it was his very first flight as an instructor. So a number of factors involved with the pilot, the cockpit crew, which ultimately is why the majority of the blame was placed on the crew for mismanaging that landing. Does that check out with everything that you've learned over the years?
Well, yes. To add to all of this, I have, several friends. One is a captain with American Airlines. Another one is a private jet pilot. So anytime I go to those stories as a journalist, I'm always checking my sources before I go to those situations so that I'm able to, especially to have accurate information is gold. Yes. And that is my job, is to always do no harm and make sure that the information is accurate and it is completely so as transparent as possible. And so before going into that situation, I was on the phone going, tell me everything you know about flying into SFO. Tell me about the seawall. Tell me about, as a native Californian and born and raised in San Francisco, I've been flying into that airport. So I knew the seawall. I've been nervous flying in and looking at the tail and having that, understanding of it's challenging. The winds are coming in, the ocean is coming in. So it's a challenging airport. But, sadly, when I was talking to my sources, they said, look, it's normally pilot error. So going into that, I kind of had that in the back of my head. Of course, I never said anything like that because that's inappropriate, but it kind of gives you a data point to move forward. And all of that information that has come out, sadly, it was pilot error. And it was a cacophony of pilot errors, as you were mentioning those details, wrong person in the wrong seat, just the inexperience. And that still compounds the sadness of how did that happen and why did that happen? And it doesn't negate the fact that 3 people lost their lives. 3 young people lost their lives.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about the victims, not just the 3 fatalities, but the more than 100 that were ultimately injured as a result, and touch on some of your reporting from that day after we take a real quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Chip Brewster being joined by Teresa Stasio from KRON 4. We are talking about Asiana 214, a flight that crashed coming into San Francisco Airport in July 6, 2013. And Teresa, before I ask you the next question, I actually want to see some of your reporting from that day. So I've got two different stories of yours. You mentioned before you're usually the one sent to talk to victims, and so you had the difficult job of trying to summarize all of the different treatments taking place across multiple hospitals in the area. And so this is back in 2013, you doing your best work on camera. Here it is.
Here at San Francisco General Hospital, doctors say that a very injured child from Asiana Flight 214 is showing some progress. They say that they have upgraded the child's condition from critical to serious. Right now, there are 12 people still admitted here at San Francisco General. Their injuries range from very significant situations, from traumatic brain injury to paralysis, as well as road rash from possibly being dragged on the ground after the crash. Elsewhere in San Francisco, at St. Francis Hospital, one person remains hospitalized, and at St. Mary's Hospital, one person is there as well. At Stanford, there are 4 people who still need care. In total, there are still 39 people being treated for a wide range of injuries, all because they were hurt in Asiana Flight 214. In San Francisco, Teresa Stasio, KRON 4 News.
You remember this particular story, short as it was, but trying to gather all of that victim information into one place?
Yes, and it was so hard because, I was like, I think I have all the facts. I think and it's, you're just flying off the seat of your pants. I want to fix my lapel.
Can't go back in time for that one. I'm sorry.
So it's, I was nervous. My job is not to be nervous on camera, but I was nervous because I was, you're constantly worried. Do I have all of the facts? Do we have all the information? Is it going to change? All of those moving parts. And, you're also trying to manage your emotions. These are people, right? It may be a number, but these are all people. And then trying to find information was really, really difficult because there was this giant language barrier. So
Yes.
It was a very, very complicated situation. Hospitals don't want to give you information. So you're trying to get factual information, dealing with emotions. People don't want to talk to you. So there's so many roadblocks and that you're trying to climb over to try and manage your emotions, manage other people's emotions, try and, just to get to San Francisco General, nobody knows, but to try and get physically into a hospital is very difficult. So we were being told by security, you can't be here. And I'm like, well, I can. You're right, I can't, so it's that delicate balance of trying to be as professional as you can. That expression, you can't let them see you sweat. And I was just sweating bullets, just trying to figure it all out.
And you mentioned the language barrier. We should touch on the victims of this crash. So there were 307 people on board total. We mentioned the 3 fatalities, 187 injuries as a result of this, with 49 of them being serious. Among those most seriously injured were the 4 flight attendants who were in the rear, in their jump seats, all the way at the back of the plane, that were thrown onto the runway while still strapped to their seats when it crashed. And when you talk about language barrier, you keep in mind this is coming from South Korea, and I understand there was a summer camp from China on board. So now you have primarily Chinese speakers, Korean speakers, kids who aren't with their parents. You're doing your best, but at the same time, the first responders, the hospitals, probably dealing with that as well and doing their best to try and address everybody that needs help.
All of those situations are chaotic, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's chaos, adrenaline, that compounds, a situation like that. And then you add on these other layers, there were children, scared children, right? And then you added the layer of language barrier. And then you added on foreign country. And then you added on, so there were so many layers of complexity to this situation that just made it exponentially harder for us to do our job.
Yeah.
And again, I can't even emphasize, we're just trying to claw through and find the facts and trying to not make sure that we were not saying the wrong thing. Right. Or misinformation.
Yeah.
And, the wheels are just spinning. with the pressure of like, you need to be live on the air. Well, I don't have all the information. Well, we need you to be live on the air. Okay, well, okay. And trying to do the best you can.
And one of the biggest controversies you and I discussed before we started involved one of the fatalities. Before we get to that, I kind of want to end the show and give whatever time we have left to talk about that, because it's still thought about and discussed today. I do want to bring in one more of your stories. We've mentioned the first responders multiple times. One of your other ones is us hearing from those first responders about what it was like responding to that scene.
I just knew that those people were trapped in there and they needed help.
For San Francisco police officer Jim Cunningham, he says so much happened so fast, he's still trying to remember it all. But what stands out is how he says that he just wanted to save every person on Asiana Flight 214.
So I went inside there and we're trying to get people out on backboards. A lot of people had injuries. They couldn't move out of their seats. After we got everybody out of the plane, we're trying to get people away from the plane because the ground there was all dry grass. And one spark, anybody lying on the ground would get burnt up.
Officer Cunningham says that when word came out that some people were unaccounted for, he panicked.
And they said there was 40, 50 people missing. My heart just dropped because I know I looked and I thought I made a mistake. And I wanted to go back in and look through the rubble. And I was watching, and by then it was burning in the middle. And I almost started crying because I thought I screwed up and some people got killed. And then later on we found out it was just a miscommunication and stuff. But I was sure I'd run through there and make sure everybody was safe.
Cunningham was just one of many out helping. Upon reflection, their commander says that everyone worked beyond the call of duty that day.
I was very proud to see my officers out there not worrying about themselves and making sure that they would protect and help everybody as well as they could.
Back to Cunningham, when asked if he was a hero for doing what he did, there were two distinct comments.
It's doing my job. Thank you.
He's a hero.
In San Francisco, Teresa Estacio, KRON 4 News.
And so hearing that, it is hard to bring up, but we need to, that bit of controversy. It was mentioned in the very first story, that look back we talked about. I had said there was even newer information discovered, and this is that moment. It was one of the fatalities. There was a county coroner that stated they were killed as a result of being run over by an emergency response vehicle. And it wasn't until much later that a separate investigation determined they had died before that moment, but the facts remain, they were run over as a part of that response. Dive into that controversy a little bit. What was it when you discovered that, when the news discovered that, and how did it proceed forward?
I think all of our hearts sunk. I mean, the law enforcement really did an amazing job. Like at the end of that clip, that was the police chief, Greg Sir. So, the chief really in Cunningham is since retired. I mean, these were people that I knew well and personally, and their hearts were breaking as they were trying to do everything they could in a very chaotic situation. And to be clear, it was the fire truck that ran over this child that was out on the tarmac. And it was something out of a Stephen King movie where the foam was everywhere. And it was something that you would only see in a movie. It was just so visually confusing. And those areas are also, it's foggy oftentimes in the San Francisco Bay Area. So there was just so many different elements to that.
Yeah, environmental factors, basically.
Environmental factors, chaos on top of already a complicated situation. So when we found out that there was, a passenger that had fallen out on the tarmac and run over, and that they weren't able to account for everyone. It was just it's the stuff that nightmares are made of, to be in that situation, especially people with the badge, firefighters and police officers. They dedicate their entire lives to help and protect people.
Do you know, did things change as a result of that particular incident at SFO, or even in, air safety and training in general?
Yeah, without a doubt. Good friends of mine that are with the San Francisco Fire Department, and they still talk about this. This isn't something, even though, it happened a long time ago, situations like that become, it's a PTSD moment, and it's something called compound PTSD, where it is profoundly goes into your nervous system. And these are people that take these jobs incredibly to a level that you and I can only imagine. They live it, they breathe it, they walk it. Every single day they put that uniform on. That is their lives, right? So there has been extensive changes in the San Francisco Police Department and Fire Department as they've worked in tandem to be in those scenarios. So there are extensive drills. There's just a lot that has transformed over the years to try and make sure that something like that never happens again. The best case situation of, having that happen is, it was just, I say a nightmare, and it was just a nightmare. They were conflicted and traumatized by that for a very long time, and it was not anything that would ever go away. They bring it up. They still bring it up.
Well, and it seems like it's stuck with you and likely your reporting teammates as well, as one of those events that you cover through your reporting career that when you walk through SFO, you can't help but think about.
No, and I was at SFO recently, and I saw the room that we were all shuffled into. And then they brought an interpreter so that we could have a better understanding. And then as the days unfolded, family members of the passengers injured started to show up. This was, that's one thing that we're not able to show is what's happening behind the scenes, right? And that this was not just a one-day event. It was coverage that we covered for weeks.
And here we are years later talking about it again. I do have to wrap on the show, though, Teresa. I appreciate you taking the time to revisit that event with me and inform all the viewers who perhaps had never heard of it before about something that had happened those years ago and still having an impact today.
Without a doubt. It's always my pleasure to kind of peel the layer off so we can dive inside.
Exactly. Well, until the next We Witness episode, I'm Chip Brewster. Thanks so much for watching, and take care, everybody.